Back with another episode of The Blue Turf. This is Thad Bell from the Kansas City Soccer Journal I will let Erik say it, but he'll tell us where we are. But with me, Erik Bergerud. How are you, sir?
It's always great to be with you at the world-famous Kansas City Soccer Dome, Mr. Bell.
So even if I say the world-famous Soccer Dome, Kansas City Soccer Dome, I don't say it the same way. You just have a flair for it.
You have to have the enthusiasm for it, and then you have to believe it, and you have to own it, right?
Yes, yeah, so I'm not really like a good public paid spokesperson.
Well, hey, it's just like anything. Whether you're talking about the Soccer Dome, Wallace Scora, once people start hearing this again and again and again and again, then all of a sudden you've created it. So this is absolutely the world-famous Kansas City Soccer Dome.
Are you suggesting we should talk about Wallace Scora after this?
Well, I think we can talk about Wallace Scora after this, too, because everybody wants to Wallace Scora now, Thad.
We're kind of enjoying. We were talking about this a little bit before the pod, but yeah, we'll get to that. All right. Positives from this last weekend, 2 wins in Kansas City versus the Ambush, in St. Charles versus the Ambush. 2 good wins. What did you get out of that, man?
Well, a couple positives. I mean, I think most everybody expected Kansas City to win at home. It wasn't as easy as maybe people might have thought, but St. Louis is always going to play Kansas City hard in anything. It could be tiddlywinks, it could be Yahtzee, it could be darts. There's always going to be a battle, right? Yeah. And so you would expect that from the Ambush. I think that the win in St. Charles on New Year's Eve was sort of the bigger moment, because this was a place that Kansas City has struggled in recent years, and in some cases just not playing well, in some cases letting leads go, and they won this one. They earned that one. And kudos in particular to Zach Reggett, who admittedly didn't feel like he had the best game. That Thursday night game in Kansas City, he totally delivered in St. Charles. 3 goals and 2 assists, and definitely was a difference maker. He's, as we're recording it, he's a candidate for MASL Offensive Player of the Week. I will admit freely I voted for him because you total things up. 4 goals scored, 2 assists, 2 game-winning goals. That's a pretty good week for anybody.
Yeah, if I had a vote, I would probably vote for him also.
So, you need to get a vote.
They don't give it to me.
I don't know what to tell you about that.
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk to – who should I talk to about that?
I talk to the league, see what they say.
Hey, Keith Tozier, I know you listen.
Give
me a vote. All right. Yeah, it was 2 good games, and I mean, we can say, Zach didn't have a great game here in Kansas City.
He said that.
I know, but he had a goal and a game winner.
Yep.
It's still, I mean, he was still pretty good.
Somebody's having a good time.
Yeah, there was just a large amount of yelling from the locker room area over there, so apparently something happened.
Yep.
All right, besides Zach, who else had the standout games for you?
Nicolau Neto. Definitely in the Kansas City one. He's up for goalkeeper of the week. It's a pretty competitive slate this time. Really came up big. Some of his foot saves are just unbelievable, and he came up big in both games. What's interesting is there's so much parsing of his game, and when he leaves the box, and I saw people online dinging him for leaving the box on the Wallace Scora goal that Skylar Funk scored against Kansas City in the first quarter of Game 2. But for me, it was in Game 1, another Wallace Scora goal where Will Eske fed Niamsi off the sideboards, and I saw Neto in sort of a moment, do I leave the box or do I not? And he sort of stopped himself at the edge of the box. Niamsi went underneath him and scored. I don't know necessarily that Neto would have gotten to the ball had he kept the run going, but Neto last year absolutely would have kept running. And so he's still trying to adjust his game, but I still contend that he's a top 5 goalkeeper in this league. And if you were to look at the end of the season with a highlight save reel of Neto, you'd feel really good about it as a Comets fan.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I think Neto overall this season has played really well. I think he had probably 1 weak game there, and really weak game. I won't say really weak, but he had a weak game, and then the rest have been pretty darn good.
He's tied for the league in wins, 6 wins overall. He got no decision on that. At least I don't think. Yeah, he got a no decision in that game against Texas. because he came in the fourth quarter. But, absolutely strong throughout the year, and they're going to need him for some of these big games coming up.
I think I'm going to try to get Neto on the pod here sometime in the next week or two, because I talked to him after last practice just for a little while. It was very off the record kind of stuff, but I think he's having a good season, and some of it is him being pushed a little bit by Philip, because it always is good to have competition, but I think some of it is that, as we've talked before, having a slightly more steady defense in front of you when you have added Vandegrift and Palmer, although they haven't played all the games. But
well, I'd say yes, and I will tell you, I was getting messages after that second Texas game when Philip Ejimadu just was lights out for 3 quarters. I was getting messages from throughout the league like, hey, not only you have a great goalkeeper, but then there was like, you have some serious competition now. And I think that as a head coach, Stefan Stokic, that's what he wants, because as you said that, it pushes players to be better. I think absolutely that has pushed Neto. I also think that his game has changed because of having 2 defenders of the year in front of him. Unfortunately, he hasn't had 2 defenders of the year in front of him for every game. Should see Berto back for the UCFC game on the 12th. At least that's what he told me when I talked to him last week. But having both those things happen, it's definitely elevated his game.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I mean, not that there weren't good defenders in front of him before, but again, we've talked about this, but last year losing the transition game, this year the transition game being better, having the better defenders, having, more defenders to choose from. I mean, that was one of the issues last couple of years. It was always like, well, we only have these 4 defenders, or we have these 3 defenders and a guy who can play it. So
going back to this weekend, we talked about the positives. If there's one negative that I'm sure Coach Stokic has seen as something that I definitely saw is, I think where St. Louis creates problems for Kansas City is in the transition game. And the transition goals that Kansas City gave up in both games, not good from a Comets perspective. And so that's something that other coaches looking at film will probably like to exploit. But that's where I think St. Louis kept both those games close, is their ability to counter Kansas City.
Well, it's a little bit of the after practice fun where people are working on things individually, but they're also kind of playing fun games. And there was a group of players that were head against the wall and waiting to get their rears hit by a ball kicked by several players. So that's why we paused for a second.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that at other practices, but yeah, that was seems to be a very MASL kind of thing to do. And you have somebody like Zach Reggett back there about to launch a ball at your behind.
Yep.
It may not be a fun thing. Speaking of Zach, I mean, and we were already talking about him before. His one game was not his best. Just a game-winning goal, that sort of thing. And then hat trick the next game. How many games now is this straight that he scored?
9 in a row. The Comets 3, as the professor lovingly calls them, record is 17 by Vahid Asupor, and so that's definitely in reach for Zach. He has an interesting matchup coming up this Saturday because he was briefly a member of the Harrisburg Heat, and we definitely will be talking about that on air during the broadcast about that trade, because there were a lot of Comets fans who were, I think, agitated, maybe an understatement,
yes,
about the trade last year that brought Zach Reggett from Harrisburg. If you recall, Florida sent him north.
Yep.
And then since Lucia Tetsane, Mike De Silva, and Richard Schmerman to Harrisburg. What's interesting about this is when Harrisburg comes to town on Saturday, none of the 3 of those are going to be playing. And so if you were to look objectively at the trade, one of the best trades in Kansas City indoor soccer history, bar none,
yes,
by far. However, if you go back a year ago or a season ago, there were a lot of angry Comets fans about this, and I'll be kind of curious to see whether people have changed their tune. And but the atmosphere at Cable Dome Arena, it looks like Kansas City has embraced Zach Reggett as their star of the day.
When you have a guy that scores for 9 games straight, 3 hat tricks now, however many 4 hat tricks now, 3 in this season already. I mean, it's hard not to like a guy who plays with that much ability, that much skill, scores, but also that much passion. It's hard not to like the guy, even if you didn't like the trade because you had fan favorites on the other side of that trade, which, none of them are really contributing right now not to Harrisburg, and they are contributing, a couple of them for St. Louis a little bit, but I haven't seen Lucia. I mean, I guess he's.
I don't want to take responsibility for saying this, but I have read online that visa issues have created problems both in his case as well as for Hugo Silva, whom Harrisburg signed after Florida ceased operations. And so that's not me saying that. That's what I have read.
I will just say I've heard that there may be other issues besides visa stuff for Lucia.
There could be, true.
I'm not going to report that as 100%, but I believe it myself.
So going back to Zach, and I have maybe too many conversations with people around the league, so I'm not going to name drop who said this because there's probably two different people who have said this, including a pretty well-known defender in the league, that if you have a team that has a top target and a top goalkeeper, you're going to go far.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at Kansas City and when they've been successful in the past, think Leo Gibson when he was player Leo Gibson before he was coach, and Danny Waltman, say. And you look at that combination, and I know there were other targets at the time, but it's been a while since you can say that Kansas City has somebody who could potentially be leading the league in scoring and have a goalkeeper who could be leading the league in goalkeeping, and that's where Kansas City is on the precipice of this right now. Zach is contending for the scoring title, goal scoring, and Neto is contending in all sorts of different goalkeeping categories.
Well, I mean, when you look at outdoor, people always talk about the spine, a center forward, a center midfielder, a defender, and a goalie. If you can have a good one in all of that, then that's a great start, right? In indoor, if you have the target forward, you have the goalie, add a shutdown type defender in there, and somebody else who can create a little bit, and you should be able to compete with anybody. And you may not win it all, but
and you look at the teams that have been dominant in recent years, and the teams that are doing really well this year, and then look at what they have in common. You think of San Diego, think of a Craig Shiles and a Boris Pardo, right? Yep. You've seen this in Chihuahua. You're seeing this in Monterey for sure, and UCFC, whom we'll get to see next week. They have Gordy Gerson's been hurt, but you bring in Frank Tayu and you have Andrew Coughlin, the way he's playing in goal. That's a recipe for success. And I think that if you were to take a moment after this podcast, go to the MASL website, look at the standings, click on the team links, you would see that there's a correlation. I'm not saying cause and effect, a correlation between the teams that have the best records and where you can legitimately say they have a top goal scorer target and they have a top goalkeeper.
Whether it's a causation or a correlation, it is a founding principle that you need those things to build a good team. You can have some success when you have a weakness here and there, but if you don't have those, you're probably not going to succeed no matter how good the coach is. All right. So speaking of Zach's fourth hat trick, and it's for his time here, 3 this year. I was looking at Mike Kuhn's stats that he provides, juice boxes, and I actually asked him for a little more because I was curious. But his fourth hat trick in all competitions tied him with Sosa, Ellis, and Lucas Rodriguez for 6th all-time on that list. Not a bad group there.
In less than a year's time, right?
Right. Much less than a year's time. But I was curious, I wanted to make sure who else was on that list of hat tricks. So let's see, in all competitions, Brian Perez with 5, Max Toulouse with 6, Byron Alvarez with 13, Fahid Asapor with 13, and Leo Gibson with 39.
Pretty good company there for Zach Reggett in a short period of time. And since you mentioned Mike Kuhn, and we're going to take a look at a couple other stats nuggets that he put out there this week. Definitely subscribe to KC Soccer Journal if you don't, because what Mike does with his juice boxes, he in addition to talking about the current Comets history, he'll go back all the way, which is something that intrigues me. And then you look at a Nicolau Neto or a John Sosa in terms of where they are ranking now in all-time indoor soccer history. I think we spent so much time in Kansas City glorifying the 1980s, but you're already seeing some people that are heading into that
Yes.
upper echelon of all time, where they will have their place in Kansas City indoor soccer history for decades. And John Sosa is already there. Nicolau Neto, should he win his next game, he will top Scoop Stanisic, who, by the way, I know played in the 90s, played with the Attack, but still an all-timer. 5th all-time in wins, with Enzo DePede not too far ahead. And so all of a sudden you're putting Nicolau Neto into this category, and I think that that's something that deserves a lot more attention.
It's I know it's always the argument of the eras versus the the modern game versus the old game, all that stuff, but it still comes down to you performed in that league and all that. And Leo has to stack up against anybody in this plated indoor soccer history. Sosa has to stack up against that. And some of these other guys that were on there, Vahid, Byron Alvarez, they were amazing players.
So here's the other thing, particularly when you're talking about Leo Gibson and you're talking about John Sosa, and I start thinking ahead about jerseys in the rafters at Cable Dom Arena. These are guys who have made Kansas City their home, who have spent more than a decade here as members of the Comets.
Yeah.
That original Comets franchise was only around for 10 seasons. So I know we spent a lot of time talking about the days at Kemper or whatever else. These are players that have given more years of service than many of those names that are synonymous for that first era of indoor soccer in Kansas City.
We've talked about this before, but it's a testament to what this team does. Again, recruiting local, getting guys local, and then keeping guys around for a long time that are good players and are in the community. When we name some of those guys, they've coached, they've played at college here, they've coached in colleges here, they've played here. It's just they have charities here, all these things.
So this reminds me, and before we nip the bud on the St. Louis last week conversation, there was all sorts of banter in the Twitch chat on Sunday, on New Year's Eve, about who's the real soccer capital, and I might have been called a name affecting my age when I wanted to jump in and say, hey, I can share all-time records if you would like.
Yeah.
So there's some convenient moving of the goalpost, I think, in the St. Louis soccer community in terms of how you compare the two. And so my colleague on the St. Louis broadcast, Matt Rocchio, I have a lot of respect for, wanted to move it in terms of which city has produced the most EPL players. Okay, that's great, but that shows that you send people away from your city rather than keep them in your city. You look at all-time records, which Kansas City on Sunday, that's the 100th ever win, going back to the NASL days, which I think is pretty significant. You look at titles, that's pretty significant as well. But you look at the soccer community, and I'll give St. Louis all the respect in the world for bringing up players who have succeeded in the NASL, MISL, all sorts of leagues. But you can't think about the Kansas City soccer community without the impact of the Kansas City Comets. And what you were saying, that is the players that not only been recruited locally, but have stayed post-career and have reinvested in the Kansas City soccer community, but the Kansas City community writ large. It's a great story. It's been, I think, overshadowed by Sporting Kansas City's relative recent success, but you cannot talk about Kansas City soccer in 2024, and we are in 2024 now, without a large chapter or two devoted to the Kansas City Comets.
Totally agree, and we need to write a book about this.
In all our spare time.
Yeah.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, plenty of time. But, you mentioned like he was moving the goalpost by change. That's what people that are losing arguments do.
Well, I think that's, kudos to St. Louis that they have developed players who've moved on and done great things. There's no question about that. I salute that as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to focus on are you winning championships in your own city? How are your teams doing? And so this whole St. Louis City FC finishing in first place, but conveniently ignoring the fact that they got knocked out by Sporting Kansas City in the playoffs. I mean, if we're going to keep having this conversation with St. Louis and Kansas City, let's come up with shared objective criteria for how you define success rather than everybody picking on something. I don't think it's a stretch to look at head-to-head record and looking at how many titles that you've won. And what I have yet to do, because I will definitely then be called a grandpa again, is to ask people who want to engage in this banner, were you even alive the last time the St. Louis Ambush won a championship? And, oh, by the way, if you look at all the professional teams in in St. Louis, the Ambush are the only ones to have won a title. Only. St. Louis Stars didn't do it. Steamers didn't do it. St. Louis City, in their first year, great, they have a regular season championship, but that's about it.
St. Louis Storm didn't do it.
Them too.
I always pull them out because I watched them for a solid year with some really great players.
Love that team. They had a lot of talent on that team, but they didn't get it done either.
Nope. They were a lot of fun to watch. Some guy named Preki, which he played outdoor.
Zoltan Toth, Fernando Clavillo. They had, if you look at their roster, they had some all-timers on that team, and it didn't happen. But that's another story for another podcast, maybe.
And I know we'll end up talking about this. I don't know how many times, but there is no one right way to declare a soccer city. But I just do feel like you can't claim soccer capital when you really didn't have anything for 3 decades. But that's me. Erik,
I don't really have anything else to add to it. So
trying to leave Erik speechless here. All right, St. Louis is done. Past them for now. I'm sure we'll talk about it again later in this year. Coming up, though, Harrisburg.
Do we need to sell some advertisements and take a break, or that's up to you? It's your podcast. I'm just here as a guest.
All right, I will take a little break, put a couple ads in here, and be right back on the other side. Maybe hear some music, maybe not. We're back, segment 2, and I was listening to Sirens for the...
It must be the first Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. at the world-famous Kansas City Soccer Dome when we're recording this.
So anyway, we're back. Talk about Harrisburg. Not the best team at the moment. They're struggling a bit. Could they go winless this year?
Well, so I actually, when I looked at their roster preseason with the signings they have, I firmly believed they were going to be better than what they were. What I didn't know at the time were the visa challenges that they were going to have that have definitely impacted. Because arguably, I mean, Dom Francis is great. Dom Francis, we're going to highlight during Saturday's broadcast, but Lucia Tetsane brought a different level of game in that midfield in Harrisburg for the short time he played there last season. They definitely miss him. Hugo Silva, if you look at some of his numbers in goal, insane numbers when he was a member of the Florida Tropics. And so you lose those two. It doesn't explain or excuse everything, but they have legitimately struggled in not every match, but in most matches this year.
If you're Coach Stokic and you have a team that's struggling coming in and you know that you're going to have a tough game the following game and then a really long road trip, how do you approach this? Do you give some other guys a chance to get some experience? Do you rest some veterans that maybe are carrying some injuries? Or do you go out and try to just dominate this and kick some ass and make sure your standings are good?
Well, so I think I've said this before. The X factor this year for some coaches to contemplate is the fourth tiebreaker as you're looking into playoff positioning is goal differential. And UCFC is putting up some huge numbers, Monterey putting up some huge numbers, buoyed by that 22-5 victory over the Sidekicks earlier this season.
Yep.
I think you have to consider that in terms of here's a team that has played a decent number of games on the road in Harrisburg, that has had some challenges on the road. Push, pull, cost, benefit, what do we do? I'm not sure which way he's going to go, but he could be led in either direction, which is, hey, let's do a mixed lineup, get some people healed, or, hey, maybe there's an opportunity we can score a lot of goals. I guess we'll find out on Saturday, unless he tells you something before then.
Yeah, we will. I will try to ask him if I get a chance here. I'm not sure if I'm going to get that today or not, but I know. I think I would actually kind of lead towards not playing your strongest lineup, or maybe having them on the bench and not putting them in a lot of minutes. But just because the other teams are going to have an opportunity to continue to run up those scores a bit, where you're going to have not as many opportunities to play Harrisburg.
So to reinforce this point you made that about which way is he going to go, this kind of creates a challenge for us in the broadcast, because we try to figure out halftime interview. We try to figure out spotlight players, and we've had this happen before where we've had to change a spotlight player at the last minute because somebody was going to get a rest. And so I think we've taken an educated guess at somebody who would be playing, but we may have to scramble at the last minute if we find out that, we decided we're going to give some veterans a rest. There are some unknowns with a really impressive UCFC team coming in next week, immediately followed by 3 games in Mexico in 1 week.
Yeah, that's going to be the tough stretch there, and we'll talk about that more the next week. But I guess I know it's got to be hard trying to figure out who's going to play, and especially with where this team's at right now. You have some veterans who could get rested. You have a lot of younger guys who are getting time and becoming, starting to establish themselves as guys you want them to play, but maybe they're also carrying some knocks. I mean, like Leo Acosta, Mikey Linus, some of those guys have been carrying some knocks that they have not played every game. Acosta had such a great start, 4 goals in the first 2 games? I wasn't even sure if he's going to play in St. Louis.
Yeah, I think that TBA in terms of how people are feeling on Saturday. I got in a little online exchange with MASL's Phil Levanco about the upcoming stretch of 6 games and what that's going to mean. And I said, you can't, we're in the Stokic era, #Stokic era. You have to play them 1 game at a time. And I mean, he thought, okay, that's cute. You're using your sort of the standard coach thing. But I believe that Coach Stokic is telling his team that you cannot overlook Harrisburg, because on any given day, any team in this league can take you down. Some teams create different kinds of challenges, but I don't expect him to go in saying, no, let me rephrase that. I know he's not going to go into this game saying we've got this game won and we can play anybody, right? Because Harrisburg has too many veterans on that team who can do damage, and Dom Francis isn't the only one. You've got Joey Tavernese, who's a veteran player there. Danny DePrima got a goal this past Sunday at UCFC. They have people who can score on that team. There's no doubt about that. I think the question is, how do you set up this game for the next game? And what's going to get you there for that next game? Because UCFC is, for some people, the surprise team. For me, not so much a surprise, but the surprise team of 23-24. He's already had this conversation with himself, and I'm sure with his coaching staff, in terms of what do we need to do for the first game, and then translate that into the second game.
It would kind of be embarrassing to be the first loss to Harrisburg.
At home. So they played earlier. They actually played last month in Harrisburg, won 7-3, and I think it was a fairly comfortable win. Another challenge, though, has been, and I think he mentioned this in the post-game news conference that we had Sunday, that was too often the Comets are giving up the first goal.
Right.
I think that happened in Harrisburg. In fact, I'm pretty sure it happened in the Harrisburg game. It definitely happened with St. Louis twice, and that's something that he wants to nip in the bud, too. Hopefully that won't become a pet phrase that I start using all the time. But you can get away with it a few times. You cannot get away with it all the time in terms of going down 1-0 early.
No. So, yeah, I think if it was me, I would I would have a younger lineup, but with veterans on the bench ready to step in to play a little bit more as necessary, because you want to get everybody experience, but you also want to keep guys fresh, but then you have guys like Zach who you can't rest him because he would pretty much revolt. I think
so too, and it's not just keeping that scoring streak alive; it's that he's hungry and he wants goals, and that's the type of player you want on your team.
Yeah, he's happy when he scores.
That's right.
And we're happy when he scores.
That's right, too.
All right. Anything else we need to talk about today, Eric?
A couple things happening around the league. There's the annual coaches convention is going to be in Anaheim next week. And so, interestingly enough, there's going to be an exhibition, an MASL exhibition in the convention center in Anaheim. That's the first time they've done it. But I learned yesterday that it's not going to be with walls. It's going to be a futsal style. I don't know whether that means it's going to be turf or whether they're going to play it on a flatter surface, but it's Empire and San Diego. I can't speak for San Diego, but what I've heard from Empire is they're not going to risk getting any veterans hurt on that, but looking to find out what other news comes out of that convention, and I would encourage followers of this podcast. There was an article that came out yesterday in the LA Times written by Kevin Baxter. You can find it online. That was a profile of the Empire Strikers, which is a really big deal because the LA Times does not focus a lot of attention on indoor, let alone indoor in another county. But some interesting news about a potential next player signing, Mexican national team player, but also what Empire is thinking in terms of not only growing the game, but growing the league. I don't want to share more than that. I would encourage you to look for that because I think this league is moving in a really strategic direction, thinking about its place, not to try to compete with MLS, but to find its lane and a lane that can be sustainable.
Yeah, and I think they've done so much good to make progress. I mean, not everything has worked perfectly and not everything has been the right step, but I think they're taking really good steps, and I think more teams are trying to build the game, and we've talked about that a little bit before too.
So one more thing I'd mention, another great crowd this past Thursday at Cable Dome Arena. That was on a Thursday night. Granted, it's during the holidays, but Kansas City continues to lead the league by a big margin in terms of attendance. I guarantee that's been talked about a lot, is what's happening in Kansas City. So kudos to Comets fans who continue to come out. I know that this is, for some fans, not all fans, this is a lull where both Sporting Kansas City and the Current are off. And so, hey, let's go to a Comets game. But I really believe that there's a growing audience of Comets fans and not just soccer fans who go to Comets games. And it's going to be critical for the Comets to leverage that going into the final stretches of this season and then into the playoffs, because then you will be seeing scheduling conflicts, including on March 2nd when St. Louis comes to town for the last time and Sporting opens against the Philadelphia Union. And so it's going to be incumbent on the Comets to grow their own audience. And I think for the success of this league, particularly in markets where there's both MASL teams and MLS teams, you ultimately have to find your own identity and find your space and not constantly put yourself to be competing with that other team.
You mean in soccer cities where they have MLS team, NWSL team, and MASL team, and an MLS Next Pro team?
That too. And you think San Diego getting their own franchise. Yep. You look at a few other cities across the league. Dallas in particular comes to mind. Maybe not so much with NWSL, but an MLS team and a lot going on soccer-wise with two MASL teams, by the way. You have to find your lane. You have to find your identity. And it's a big enough country. It's a big enough soccer community in markets across the league where you should be able to find your lane. Heck, there are people who live in Kansas City who proudly claim they never go to a sporting game, but will on a Saturday morning go with fans of a certain Premier League team and watch it on TV and never experience it in person. There are people in Kansas City and other markets who are looking for a home, and the Comets for some of those people can be a home.
Very true. I don't understand the people who will watch EPL but not go to an MLS game at all. But that's another discussion there. All right, we'll go look for that article. That's be very interesting to read, and I do think that the league is doing well. You talk about the attendance, though. I did see somebody trying to poke a little fun at Baltimore for having some not great attendance, and compared to what Kansas City was doing. And it is kind of fun as a Kansas City to poke fun at Baltimore Blast and their owner and some other stuff. But it is better for the league if they do have good attendance.
Well, I guess on that note, and this will be my final comment for this episode, I spend maybe too much time poking fun at Milwaukee Wave fans, but Milwaukee Wave fans, among their, not all fans, but some of the more vociferous fans, among their loudest teams they've criticized were the Florida Tropics for their attendance, right. Baltimore Blast for their attendance, among other things. And I said, great. Let's just see what the world's like when Kansas City and Milwaukee play each other 24 times. I mean, ultimately, my point is, if everybody is successful, it's better for everybody and not just one or two teams.
Good, accurate, prophetic words, and I think we are out. Back for another segment with Coach Stokic. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Just watched a little bit of a fun practice there. What did you guys working on today?
We worked on, touches. We did some little passing pattern with some touches and movement. And then we worked on our pressure, two-man pressure. We went through like a little like a cycle drill in possession and pressing with two and then going into one. And then we went from there. We did some finishing 1v0, 2v1s, 3v2s, 4v3 transitional stuff. And then we ended up playing with 5v5 with, kind of what we're planning to play against Harrisburg.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of that. I won't give away any of it, but it's always fun to watch these because, these are some really competitive games. I know it's always a more serious game when it's real, but this is some fun games to watch.
Yeah, like I said, one of the things that we started the season off, if we don't train at a high level, we can't play at a high level. So what our environment we're trying to achieve here is to make an environment a game-like environment. And if we train this way, and the games become a little bit easier for us.
It's always intense. I wish everybody could watch some of these games, but back to the real games. 2 wins against St. Louis, one here in Kansas City, one on the road in St. Charles. How good was it to get a double win over a weekend, essentially?
It's really good. I think I talked with the boys before our video session this morning. There were 2 big positives for me in this weekend. Was first, we won a back-to-back weekend, and we haven't done that last year. And I can't remember the last time we did the year before that. But and for me, that's a big achievement. And then the second thing was, we showed that we can win tight games as well. Even though we didn't play our best, we're not going to digest that right now and what we did wrong. But for me is, the biggest positive is showing that not only that we can win tight games, but back-to-back as well. So,
with you said it wasn't your best. You gave up goals you gave up leads to both games, right? What are you working on to maybe solve that?
I think it's, for now is, we're trying to shift and change some things. If that's in our warm-up, I think in the last 4 games we got scored on first. In the last game we got scored on twice before we responded. So for me is, we talk with the coaching staff and how we can, adjust that, especially in training, but warm-ups and, different ideas and some things that we're going to change. But it's been a bad habit in the last 4 games of getting scored on first for sure.
With that negative of being scored on first, though, it was the response that you came back, tied it up, and then eventually won those games. There's positives even with the negatives, right?
There is, but at the end of the day, there's positive, of course, but I think initially you have to. I feel like there's a couple things that go into it. It's mindset as well. I think for us, mostly it's all mental. I think we're fit, we're ready, we've been preparing, for a long time now, and I think that, one of our biggest weaknesses as of now that I've seen is just those back-to-back games. We're not able to keep the quality of those games, right? I think, and I go back to the mentality side of it, because I think that, either thinking about saving themselves for the second game, or we're not as good as the first game in the second. So for me, it's all mental, and we have to be stronger, get stronger on the mentality side of it.
I know when the home and home game with Texas, you changed up some players, and some players in this last round too. But is that something that maybe players need to rotate more, or do you have that? You have a pretty deep team.
Yeah, the thing is, there is moments, and there was ideas of who we rotated and who was a better choice and not, and this and that. You always reflect after games, right? And after you make your decisions. But for me personally, I think it's what I don't want to do is change too much, because if you start changing too much, then you lose the flow. Yeah. You lose
continuity.
Correct. So for me, I want to give everybody the chance at the right time where they can shine and have success, right? I just had this conversation, with Cisco yesterday. After practice, I was like, I know you want to play, and we know what you're capable of doing, but I want you to be ready as much as you can, so when you have that opportunity, you have success. It's not just to play. I want you to have success. So I think for me is I don't like to change too much at once, because then you lose continuity, and then you lose those relationships on the fields, and the players are like the pressuring together or playing off the ball with each other. They already know each other. So for me is finding those right moments to put in these new players, not just throw them out there just to throw them.
Kind of following up on that with Harrisburg coming in this next game, their team that's struggled this year, they don't have a win yet. I mean, how do you approach that? Do you try to keep your best team out there, or do you maybe give some guys a chance that maybe haven't played as much against a team? So,
well, I had this conversation again with the guys before we started our video session. It's very hard to play these games because we have everything to lose and they have nothing to lose, right? And for us, if we go in the game thinking that it's going to be an easy game, they still have some good players. They still have some good. They're not a bad team. I think they're better than they were last year, to be honest with you. But I think at the end of the day is if we go in the right mindset, and I feel like right now I still have a lot of young guys in my team that are still trying to find the right rotations, the right movements, the playing with each other. And if I start pulling them in and out, I feel like I'm gonna lose some of that, right? So I think, especially with the month that we have now, January month is a huge month for us, with the travel and the teams that we're playing. So I think this month can be decisive for us. Are we going to be contenders for the championship, winning the division, or we're not? And for me, I try again not to rotate too much, right? To give everybody, there might be some changes, there might not be. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't want you to reveal everything there, obviously, but how's the health? I mean, I saw Rian out there doing a little bit of stuff when I first got here, not necessarily doing everything yet, but how's he doing? How's Berto? Who else am I missing?
Well, you're missing a lot. So at one point was it Rian, Berto, Chad, Ray, Acosta. Yeah. I think we had about like 7 players at one point. And now we're down to 2, so that's good. Berto is looking good. He's starting to do some stuff on the field with us, warming up with us at least. So we're hoping to have him in full by next week. Rian is really wanting to get ready. To be honest, I don't know. He's saying that he should be back by next week, but to be honest with you, that's going to be really, really tough with the injury that he had. So, I mean, he knows his body the best.
Right.
At the end of the day, so we'll see. I'm hoping because we missed both of them on the field. So, as of now at this moment, Berto for sure by next week, and then Rian is still questionable.
And just out of curiosity, I know you still have a guy or 2 out for visa stuff. I mean, how are they doing?
So yeah, I mean we're still working them hard. Hopefully. We get some of that stuff. Maybe there's one player that might be able to play by the end of the season. One might not be. So, I don't know. To be honest with you, we're still trying to figure that out. To be honest with you.
So, obviously, you've had a pretty good start as the head coach of the Comets. 6-1. Is that right?
Yes.
I always have to like double check my math in my head while I'm talking.
I do that as well.
But I mean, it's obvious good start. You know, you would have wanted it to be perfect, but it's a really good start, 6-1. Just how is this going now for you? I mean, because we've talked, you know, before the season. You know, we've talked, you know, during the season. But personally, like, you know, are you into that groove now? Like, you feel like you were like, you know, the head coach. You're not just like a newbie head coach. Now you're the. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, it was kind of surreal in the beginning, right? It's just that thought. We talked about it as well. Now I just feel more comfortable and more, you know, I think like you're trying to ask, did it sunk in yet? So it has sunk in, and you know, for me is the more I do it, the more I love it. Like I feel like, you know, there was that starting when we start, how is it gonna be, this and that, and that big excitement, emotion, everything else. And now I just feel like it's just, you know, kind of normal. I fell into my spot of, you know, where I'm at, and I feel like we got a lot of things into place and organized, and I feel more comfortable. And now, you know, getting that start for the season was very important, and now we got to continue working on the details, little things to make us better. You know, again, we have a big month this month, and you know, we have some tough travel in games, but I think, like I said, what I said about us winning the back-to-back close, building us character and showing our mentality, this will be another big test for us to see how we can deal with that on the road, not just at home and then the road.
Now you've kind of settled into the routine of being a head coach.
Yes.
I don't know if that's a good way to say it, but now you've settled into that. Is there things that you've like went, oh, this is a little different than I expected it to be? I've learned something, or
I mean, I think we always learn something. I think like being a coach, if you don't learn and adjust and get better, I think you never improve, right? You don't. Right. Your team doesn't improve. So for me, I don't think there was anything out of the ordinary that I wasn't expecting, but there was things that I felt that I could have done better, that I could have, you know, maybe worked more on this or more on that. But I think objectively is, you know, we got to continue learning and growing so that they can grow as well in the field. So for me, you know, well, there's things, I don't think there's something that surprised me, but there was things that I should have maybe did more of in the beginning instead of doing it later.
Can you tell me what one of those is?
For me is, you know, I initially a lot of in the beginning was transition and going to goal and not focusing a lot more, maybe playing out of the back, right? We gotten better with that because I think initially in the beginning we were just transition. And then after I think was the third game, we started working more playing out of the back. And then not just playing out of the back, but patterns of playing out of the back. Maybe I should have started that earlier. And then when we're in the offensive third over the half, we did, you know, a couple sessions with patterns and movement that we wanted, something I probably should have worked a little bit more. Because, you know, my main thing was just to build that mentality in the beginning. That was my main concern because I feel like everything else is fixable, but I think I should have started that a little bit earlier. And then, like, moving on next, like, during this month or two, starting this month, to the end of the season, we're going to start doing like individual sessions. Like you saw today, I already started it. Yeah. Working on players on their individual skills, right? Where do we see them on the field, what they can work on, what they can improve on. If that's in the offensive third, I don't know if you know our zones. We have zones on our boards now on the field. So can we, you know, zone 12 and 11, can we isolate more of Lalo and Lucas and Acosta and, you know, Mikey? Can we find Zach more in zone 14 in the central position to make runs and timing of the runs of from these zones? So I think now we're talking about more of details and specific things that we want from these players and how we can improve them. So like starting this month and going on to the playoffs, hopefully we make the playoffs, but going to the playoffs is when by that time we're hoping that's about 5 levels above where they are right now. So that will help us to win a championship.
Yeah, no, that used to be a big thing with Vlaco, I think, was like overload one side so you could isolate one guy to take on somebody to then break that open so you could, you know, break that defense down.
And we've done it a couple of times, not enough. I think, again, we're a brand new team, new coaching style. Right. I think it's a lot of things that, you know, we have to still amplify into our game plan, and I feel like we haven't done all of it yet, so we're still growing. We're still getting better by each game in every aspect. But the main thing for me is in the last 4 games, I felt we kind of, I wouldn't say lost control, but I feel like in the first 3 games we controlled the games, and we kind of a little bit lost that. We need to get back to finishing, closing out games, number one. and then all the other details that amplify with it is going to make us better and stronger.
Appreciate the time, Coach.
No
Good
problem.
luck against Harrisburg, and we'll talk again hopefully next week.
Thank you. Appreciate it.